The Vampire King's gaze swept past the girl in white silk like she was made of air, and Penelope Harper felt her breath catch as his pale eyes locked onto her instead. She stood near a marble column in the grand ballroom, dressed in simple black mourning clothes, really, though no one here knew what she was mourning. The ball had been her cousin Miranda's idea, dragging her along as a last-minute companion, a shadow to make the light look brighter. Penelope had agreed, only because staying home meant staring at the wedding dress box in her closet, empty now. The gown itself apparently vanished during Miranda's last visit to her apartment. Now she knew where it had gone. Miranda stood at the center of the ballroom floor, radiant in ivory lace and seed pearls, the exact dress Penelope had chosen 6 months ago for a wedding that never happened. The bodice fit Miranda perfectly. They'd always been the same size, similar enough in build that people sometimes mistook them for sisters instead of cousins. The dress caught the light from 1,000 candles in the chandeliers above, making Miranda glow like something celestial descended to earth. Every vampire in the room had turned to admire her when she'd made her entrance, and Miranda had preened under their attention, spinning slowly to let the skirt flare, the train pooling around her feet like spilled cream. Penelope had recognized it instantly. The specific pattern of the lace, the way the pearls formed a constellation across the bodice. Her throat had closed, rage and grief tangling so tightly she couldn't separate them. Miranda had smiled at her across the crowd, a sharp little smile that said she knew exactly what she'd done and dared Penelope to make a scene. So Penelope had retreated to the shadows instead, to this column near the wall where the light didn't quite reach, and told herself she would stay for 1 hour out of politeness and then leave. Let Miranda have her moment. Let her charm whichever wealthy vampire she'd set her sights on this time. It didn't matter. Nothing really mattered much anymore. Then the music had stopped. A hush had fallen over the ballroom, the kind of silence that felt alive, crackling with anticipation. Penelope had looked up to see the crowd parting, and there at the top of the grand staircase stood the Vampire King himself, Casimir Aurelian. Even Penelope, who paid little attention to vampire society despite living in a city built half above and half below ground to accommodate both species, knew that name. He ruled the Eastern Dominion, a territory that stretched across 12 states, commanding a court of ancient bloodlines and newer-turned vampires alike. His castle sat beneath the city's foundations, a Gothic marvel of stone and iron that predated the modern towers above by centuries. Humans were occasionally invited to court functions as a gesture of diplomacy, as entertainment, as potential donors, or, rarely, as candidates for turning. The invitation had come to Miranda's family estate 3 weeks ago, extended to all eligible members of the household. Miranda had been vibrating with excitement ever since. Casimir Aurelian descended the stairs slowly, and Penelope found herself staring, despite her intention to remain unaffected by everything tonight. He was tall, his frame wrapped in black clothing that looked simultaneously medieval, and modern fitted trousers, boots that reached his knees, a long coat that swept behind him like wings. His skin held the particular translucent pallor that marked ancient vampires, bloodless and moon-touched, and his hair fell past his shoulders in white silver waves that caught the candlelight. His face could have been carved from marble, all sharp planes and severe beauty, and his expression revealed nothing at all. He moved like a predator, each step deliberate and contained, and the assembled guests watched him the way prey might watch a wolf, with mingled fear and fascination. He reached the ballroom floor and paused. His pale eyes, gray or silver, Penelope couldn't quite tell from this distance, scanned the crowd with slow precision. Miranda stepped forward slightly, lifting her chin, letting the dress catch the light. Other girls in beautiful gowns did the same, positioning themselves in his line of sight, hoping to be noticed. Casimir's gaze moved over them all, brief and dismissive. Then it swung toward the shadows where Penelope stood, and their eyes met. The world seemed to contract to that single point of connection. Penelope felt pinned, a butterfly on a board, unable to look away, even as her instincts screamed at her to run. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those pale eyes, recognition, perhaps, or interest. He began walking again, and to Penelope's horror, he was walking directly toward her. The crowd shifted and murmured, confused. Miranda's smile faltered. Someone whispered nearby, "Who is that?" And someone else answered, "I don't know. She wasn't on the guest list by name." Casimir stopped 3 feet from Penelope. Up close, he was even more imposing, taller than she'd realized, and the power radiating from him made her skin prickle. He studied her face for a long moment, and she found herself unable to speak, her tongue frozen. Then he extended one pale hand, palm up, a courtly gesture, old-fashioned and formal. "Dance with me," he said. His voice was quiet, barely above a murmur, but it carried the weight of absolute command. Penelope's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want to be here, didn't want to be seen, certainly didn't want to be at the center of attention in a room full of vampires and social climbing humans. But something in his expression stopped her, not threat exactly, but a kind of intensity that suggested refusal wasn't really an option. And beneath her anxiety, a small spark of defiance flared. Let Miranda see. Let her see what it felt like to be overlooked while someone else wore your skin, your life, your stolen things. She placed her hand in his. His skin was cool, not cold as she'd expected, and his fingers closed around hers with careful precision. He led her to the center of the floor, and the crowd drew back to give them space. The musicians, who had stopped mid-song when the king appeared, hurriedly found their places again and began a waltz. Casimir placed one hand at her waist, kept her other hand in his, and began to move. Penelope had taken ballroom dancing lessons years ago, part of her mother's insistence on proper accomplishments for young ladies, and the muscle memory returned as she followed his lead. He danced the way he moved, with predatory grace and absolute control, guiding her through the steps effortlessly. She dared a glance up at his face and found him watching her with that same intense focus, as though she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "What's your name?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Penelope Harper," she managed. "You're human." "Yes." "Why are you dressed for mourning at a ball, Penelope Harper?" The question was so direct it caught her off guard. She considered lying, offering some polite deflection, but something about his expression made her think he would know. So she told the truth instead. "Because I am mourning," she said, "and I didn't particularly want to be here tonight." "Yet you came." "My cousin insisted." His eyes flicked briefly toward Miranda, who stood at the edge of the floor watching them with barely concealed fury, then returned to Penelope. "The girl in the white dress." "Yes." "It's yours," he said. Not a question. Penelope felt her breath hitch. "What?" "The dress. It belongs to you. I can smell your grief on it underneath her perfume." Penelope's throat tightened. Of course, vampires had senses humans couldn't match. She'd forgotten that, or maybe hadn't really believed it until this moment. "It was my wedding dress," she said quietly. "She took it from my apartment." "Where is your husband?" "I don't have one. He changed his mind 2 weeks before the ceremony." Casimir's expression shifted slightly, the first real change she'd seen. His eyes narrowed, and though his face remained otherwise still, she sensed anger there, cold and sharp. "I see." They danced in silence for another turn around the floor. Penelope became aware of the eyes on them, the whispers rippling through the crowd. She caught a glimpse of Miranda's face, twisted with jealousy and confusion, and felt a bitter satisfaction that shamed her, even as she savored it. "Why did you ask me to dance?" she finally said. Casimir studied her for a moment before answering. "Because you're the only person in this room who isn't performing." The observation was so unexpected, so accurate, that Penelope nearly stumbled. He steadied her automatically, his hand firm at her waist, and continued. "Everyone else is playing a role tonight, presenting a version of themselves designed to attract, to impress, to deceive. You're the only one standing in honest grief, wanting nothing." "That's not exactly a recommendation," Penelope said, surprised by her own bluntness. "I'm terrible company right now." "Perhaps, but you're honest. That's rare enough to be valuable." The music swelled toward its conclusion. As the final notes faded, Casimir stepped back and released her, though his eyes never left her face. "Will you stay for the evening?" he asked. Penelope hesitated. Part of her wanted to flee, to escape the weight of all those staring eyes, to go home and crawl into bed and forget this night had happened. But another part, the part that was tired of being overlooked and dismissed and left behind, wanted to stay purely out of spite. "I'll stay," she heard herself say. Casimir inclined his head slightly, almost a bow. Then he turned and walked away, moving toward a group of vampires who had been watching from near the staircase. Penelope stood alone in the center of the floor for a moment, suddenly unsure what to do with herself, before hurrying back toward her column. She didn't make it. Miranda intercepted her halfway across the room, grabbing her arm hard enough to leave marks. "What did you do?" Miranda hissed. "I danced with him," Penelope said, trying to pull free. "He asked. I could hardly refuse the vampire king." "You were supposed to stay out of the way. You were supposed to be background." "Then maybe you shouldn't have worn my wedding dress to get his attention," Penelope shot back, her temper finally breaking through. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Miranda's face flushed. "You weren't using it. You left it sitting in your closet like some pathetic shrine to a man who didn't want you. I gave it purpose." The words landed like physical blows. Penelope wrenched her arm free and stepped back, her vision blurring with tears she refused to shed. "Stay away from me," she said quietly. "Gladly." Miranda tossed her hair, the wedding dress's train swirling around her feet. "This isn't over. You might have caught his eye for one dance, but I'll be the one he remembers by the end of the night." She swept away, heading toward the refreshment tables where several well-dressed vampires had gathered. Penelope watched her go and felt exhausted all over again. She should leave. This had been a mistake from the beginning. But before she could make her way toward the exit, a voice spoke behind her. "Forgive the intrusion. The king has requested your presence in the gallery." Penelope turned to find a vampire woman standing there, elegant in deep blue silk, her white hair twisted into an elaborate coronet. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp, assessing. "Why?" Penelope asked. "He didn't share his reasons with me. I'm merely delivering the message." The woman gestured toward a doorway at the far end of the ballroom. "Through there, up one flight of stairs, third door on the left." Penelope could have refused, should have refused, but curiosity and that same spark of defiance made her nod. "Thank you." The gallery turned out to be a long room lined with portraits, the subjects all vampires judging by their pale skin and ageless faces. Casimir stood at the far end near a window, looking out at the underground city beyond. The view showed an impossible vista: buildings carved from living rock, streets lit by some kind of bioluminescent fungus that cast everything in soft blue-green light, and in the distance, what looked like an underground lake, still and dark as glass. "It's beautiful," Penelope said quietly, approaching. "It's hidden," Casimir replied without turning. "That's not the same thing." "Does it bother you? Living beneath the surface?" "We have no choice. Sunlight burns, and the world above belongs to your kind now." He finally looked at her, and his expression was unreadable. "Tell me why you really came tonight." Penelope blinked at the question. "I told you. My cousin insisted." "That explains the invitation, not your acceptance." She considered dissembling, but his earlier comment about honesty echoed in her mind. "I didn't want to be alone," she admitted. "Everything in my apartment reminds me of what I lost, or what I thought I had and didn't. Coming here meant a few hours of distraction, at least." "And has it been distracting?" "Painfully so." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, gone too quickly to be certain. He turned fully to face her, leaning back against the window frame with his arms crossed. "I have a proposition for you." Penelope's pulse quickened. "What kind of proposition?" "Remain at court for the next week, as my guest." "Why would you want that?" Casimir was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully measured. "Because there are those in this court who perform very well, who have learned to mimic honesty, to wear sincerity like a mask. Your presence, your inability to pretend, will help me identify them." It took Penelope a moment to understand what he was really saying. "You think someone here is lying to you, pretending to be something they're not." "I think someone here is dangerous," he corrected. "And I think your particular skill for authenticity will make them stand out by contrast." "That's not a skill. That's just me being bad at social games." "It's both." He studied her face. "I won't compel you. The choice is yours. But you'll be safe here, fed and housed comfortably, and when the week concludes, I'll ensure you're compensated for your time." Penelope knew she should say no, Spending a week in a vampire court surrounded by immortal predators and the humans desperate enough to court their favor sounded like a nightmare. But the alternative was returning to her empty apartment, to the box where her wedding dress should have been, to the life she'd built around a man who had decided she wasn't enough. "I'll need to collect some things from home," she said. Casimir straightened, and she caught something that might have been surprise in his eyes. "You're agreeing." "I'm agreeing to 1 week. After that, I go home and you leave me alone." "Acceptable." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. While you're here, you should know that several members of my court will likely approach you, some out of genuine curiosity, others because they'll see you as a way to get closer to me. Trust your instincts about which is which." "What about my cousin? What about her?" "She's going to be furious. She came here hoping to catch your attention." Casimir's expression hardened slightly. "Your cousin wore a stolen dress to impress strangers. Her fury is not my concern, and it shouldn't be yours." The casual dismissal of Miranda's feelings should have bothered Penelope, but instead she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. How long had she been accommodating Miranda's moods, smoothing over her cousin's sharp edges, apologizing for taking up space? The king's indifference was oddly liberating. "All right," she said. "When do we leave for my apartment?" "Now, if you'd like. I'll arrange an escort." The escort turned out to be 2 vampire guards who rode with her in a sleek black car that moved through the underground streets with silent efficiency before rising through a tunnel system to emerge in the human city above. Penelope's apartment was in a modest building on the east side, 3rd floor, overlooking a street that never quite got quiet. She packed quickly, throwing clothes and toiletries into a bag while the guards waited in the hallway, and tried not to look at the empty space in her closet where the dress box had been. When they returned to the castle, a servant showed her to a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. The bed was a 4-poster monstrosity draped in midnight blue velvet, and the windows covered by heavy blackout curtains overlooked the underground lake. A bathroom connected to the bedroom, all marble and gold fixtures, and someone had already laid out fresh towels and what looked like expensive soaps. Penelope sat on the edge of the bed and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The first 3 days passed in a strange blur. Penelope quickly learned the rhythms of vampire court. They slept during the day and woke at dusk, taking their blood from willing human donors who lived in a separate wing of the castle. Meals were available for the human guests at all hours, served in a dining room that felt like something from a Gothic novel, all dark wood and candelabras. Penelope ate alone mostly, though occasionally other humans would join her, young women and men who had come seeking turning, or who served as permanent donors, or who simply enjoyed the danger and luxury of vampire society. She saw Casimir at a distance during those first days, always surrounded by advisors or petitioners conducting the business of ruling. He moved through the court like a blade, sharp and efficient, and when he spoke it was in brief, decisive statements that left no room for argument. Penelope noticed how people reacted to him, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room, the way even ancient vampires deferred to his judgment. He wielded power the way some people wore clothing, naturally and without thought. On the 4th day, he summoned her to his study. The room was smaller than she'd expected, lined with books that looked ancient and smelled of leather and dust. Casimir sat behind a desk covered in papers, his white hair tied back from his face, and gestured for her to take the chair across from him. "Tell me what you've observed," he said without preamble. Penelope gathered her thoughts. "The vampire in the blue dress from the first night, the one who gave me directions to the gallery. She's positioned herself as a confidant to several of the newer court members. I've seen her collecting information, asking careful questions. Her name is Seraphine. She's my spy master." "What else?" "There's a human man who arrived 2 days ago. Dark hair, expensive suit. He's been asking about the castle's security, about how the wards work, what defenses exist against intruders." Casimir's expression sharpened. "How do you know this?" "I overheard him talking to one of the donors. He was pretending it was casual curiosity, but the questions were too specific." "Did you get his name?" "Edmund something. I didn't catch the last name." Casimir made a note on the paper in front of him. "Edmund Thorne. He claimed to be here seeking turning, but his family has ties to the hunter guilds." He looked up at Penelope. "Well done. The praise made her uncomfortable. I'm not a spy. No, but you notice things because you're not trying to. The people performing miss details because they're too focused on their own roles. He set down his pen and leaned back. Has anyone bothered you? Your cousin approached me yesterday. Penelope tensed. Miranda cornered me in the library. She's convinced I'm trying to seduce you. And are you? No. The answer came out more vehemently than she'd intended. I'm here because you asked, and because I had nowhere better to be. That's all. Casimir studied her for a moment, then nodded. Your cousin has been spending time with Edmund Thorne. Ice slid down Penelope's spine. What? They've been seen together multiple times, in conversations that stop when others approach. He paused. I believe she's being recruited. Recruited for what? The hunter guilds have been trying to infiltrate my court for years. They see vampires as abominations, threats to humanity that should be eradicated. If they can get someone inside with access to our defenses, our routines, our vulnerabilities. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Penelope's mind raced. Miranda wouldn't. She's ambitious and shallow, but she's not violent. She doesn't need to be violent herself. She only needs to provide information. Casimir's voice was quiet, almost gentle. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, and because I need to ask if you'll help me confirm it. How? Talk to her. She's more likely to reveal herself to family than to strangers. Penelope felt sick. You want me to spy on my own cousin? I want you to protect innocent lives. If the hunters attack this court, people will die. Humans and vampires both. He held her gaze. I won't force you, but I'm asking. Penelope looked away, staring at the bookshelves without really seeing them. Part of her wanted to refuse, to say this wasn't her problem, to pack her things and leave tonight. But she thought about the servants who had been kind to her, the donors who had smiled and made conversation in the dining room, even Seraphine who had been briskly professional but never unkind. She thought about the underground city with its strange beauty, all those lives that would be destroyed if hunters broke through the castle's defenses. I'll talk to her, she said quietly. Casimir's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. Thank you. Finding Miranda proved easy. She was in the ballroom again, which had become a gathering place for the human guests during the evening hours. She stood near the windows with Edmund Thorne, laughing at something he'd said, still wearing expensive dresses, though she'd stopped wearing the wedding gown after that first night. When she saw Penelope approaching, her smile turned brittle. Come to gloat? Miranda asked. Come to talk, Penelope nodded to Edmund. Privately, if possible. Edmund glanced at Miranda, who hesitated before nodding. Give us a moment. He left, though Penelope noticed he didn't go far, positioning himself near a pillar where he could probably still hear them if he tried. She led Miranda toward the opposite side of the room, near the musicians' platform where the noise would cover their conversation. What do you want? Miranda asked, arms crossed. To understand what you're doing here. You got the king's attention at the ball, or you thought you did. Why are you still here? Because I was invited to stay, same as you. No, you were invited as a courtesy, part of the general guest list. You're staying for a different reason. Miranda's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Explain why you're spending all your time with Edmund Thorne, who everyone knows has connections to hunter guilds. Fear flashed across Miranda's face, quickly hidden. We're friends. Is that a crime? It is if you're helping him plan an attack on this court. I would never. Miranda stopped, looked around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. You have no idea what it's like, being invisible, being the overlooked one. I came to this ball hoping for one night of being special, of being chosen, and you ruined it. You, in your mourning clothes and your pathetic grief, somehow caught the king's eye instead. Do you know how that felt? So this is revenge? Penelope asked, incredulous. You're going to help hunters murder people because I danced with the king? No one's going to be murdered, Miranda hissed. Edmund says the guilds just want information. They want to know how the vampires operate, what their defenses are, so they can negotiate better treaties. That's all. And you believe him? Why wouldn't I? Because he's lying to you, Miranda. The hunter guilds don't negotiate. They kill. Miranda's face flushed. You're just saying that because you want to protect your new vampire friends. You've always been like this, acting superior, pretending to be better than everyone else. I'm trying to save your life, Penelope interrupted. If you help them attack this court and it fails, the vampires will execute you. If it succeeds, you'll have the blood of innocent people on your hands. Either way, you lose. For a moment, Miranda's expression wavered, uncertainty breaking through the anger. Then she glanced toward Edmund, who was watching them now with undisguised interest, and her face hardened again. I don't need your warnings or your judgment. Stay out of my business, Penelope. She walked away before Penelope could respond, returning to Edmund's side. He put an arm around her shoulders, proprietary and possessive, and led her toward the exit. Penelope stood alone in the ballroom and felt the weight of failure settle over her shoulders. She reported the conversation to Casimir that night, finding him in the gallery where they had first talked privately. He listened without interrupting, his face expressionless, and when she finished he was quiet for a long moment. You tried, he finally said. It wasn't enough. No, but it confirmed what we suspected. He turned from the window to face her. The next few days will be dangerous. I'm increasing security and restricting access to certain areas of the castle. You should stay in your room after midnight. What are you going to do? What I must. His voice was cold, final. Protect my people. Penelope wanted to ask more, but the look on his face stopped her. She nodded and left, returning to her room with her thoughts churning. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Miranda, about Edmund Thorne, about the hunter guilds and their hatred. She thought about Casimir, too, the way he carried himself, the careful control he maintained over every word and gesture. He'd asked her to stay because she was honest, because she didn't perform. But what did she really know about him? She'd seen him conduct court business, had watched him make decisions with swift precision, had danced with him once, and spoken to him a handful of times. He was protective of his people, clearly. He was intelligent, observant. But beyond that, he remained a mystery, a creature of ice and shadows who revealed nothing of what he felt, if he felt anything at all. 3 days later, everything went wrong. Penelope woke to the sound of alarms, a high, keening wail that echoed through the castle's stone corridors. She stumbled from bed, confused and frightened, and had just reached the door when it slammed open. Seraphine stood there, her usual composure cracked by urgency. Come with me, now. What's happening? Hunters breached the east wall. We're evacuating the human guests to the secure wing. Penelope's blood turned to ice. How did they get in? Someone gave them the ward sequences. Seraphine grabbed her arm and pulled her into the hallway, where other guests were being herded along by vampire guards. Move. They ran through corridors Penelope had never seen before, descending deeper into the castle's foundations. Behind them, she could hear sounds of fighting, the clash of metal, screams, the distinctive crack of gunfire. The secure wing turned out to be a series of reinforced rooms carved from solid rock, warded so heavily Penelope could feel the magic pressing against her skin like static electricity. Seraphine pushed her inside one of the rooms where a dozen other humans huddled together in fear. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone except court guards, understand? Penelope nodded, and Seraphine vanished back into the corridor, moving with predatory speed. The next hours were endless. The humans in the room spoke in whispers, sharing rumors and speculation. Someone said the hunters had breached with military-grade weapons. Someone else claimed they'd brought vampire killing wards, holy water, stakes of blessed wood. A young woman near the back of the room was crying, convinced they were all going to die. Penelope sat against the wall and thought about Casimir. Was he fighting? Was he safe? The questions surprised her with their intensity. When had she started caring whether the vampire king lived or died? Finally, after what felt like days but was probably only 3 or 4 hours, the door opened. A vampire guard stood there, his armor spattered with blood. It's over. You can return to your rooms. The humans filed out slowly, staying close together. Penelope followed them back through the corridors, and her stomach turned at the evidence of battle scorch marks on the walls, blood on the floor, several doors hanging broken from their hinges. They passed a room where healers were tending to wounded vampires, and Penelope caught a glimpse of terrible injuries that made her look away. When she reached her room, she found it untouched, pristine as ever. She sat on the bed and shook, reaction finally setting in. A knock came at the door near dawn. Penelope opened it to find Casimir standing there, and relief hit her so powerfully she swayed. He looked terrible, his hair disheveled, his clothes torn and bloody, a healing wound visible on his neck. But he was alive, and the tension in his expression eased slightly when he saw her. "You're unharmed," he said. "Yes. Are you?" "I'll recover." He stepped into the room without asking permission, and Penelope closed the door behind him. "The hunters are dealt with. Most were killed, a few captured for questioning. And Edmund Thorne, dead. He fought to the end." Casimir's voice was flat, emotionless. "Your cousin is alive. She's being held for trial." Penelope's legs felt weak. She sat down on the edge of the bed. "What will happen to her?" "That depends on the court's judgment. She provided the ward sequences that allowed the breach. 12 vampires died tonight because of her information, and twice that many were injured." "She didn't know," Penelope said, though the words felt hollow. "She thought they just wanted information for negotiations." "Ignorance isn't innocence." Casimir moved to the window, looking out at the underground city. Dawn would be breaking above ground now, but down here it remained in perpetual twilight. "The law is clear. Traitors are executed." "Please don't kill her." The words came out before Penelope could stop them. "She's foolish and vain, and she made a terrible mistake. But she's not evil. She's just lost." Casimir was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. "Why do you care? She stole from you, humiliated you. Now she's betrayed this court and caused deaths. Because she's family. Because I remember her as a child before she became so desperate for attention. Because executing her won't bring back the people who died." Penelope stood and crossed to where he stood. "I'm not saying she shouldn't face consequences. I'm saying death is too permanent a consequence for stupidity." "What would you have me do instead?" "Exile. Send her away. Let her live with the knowledge of what she caused." Casimir turned to look at her, and his expression was unreadable. "You have a merciful heart." "Is that a weakness?" "I don't know yet." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face with careful fingers. His skin was cool against hers, and she found herself leaning into the contact without meaning to. "You confuse me, Penelope Harper." "Why?" "Because I invited you here as a tool, a way to identify threats, and somewhere in the past week you became something else." Penelope's breath caught. "What did I become?" Instead of answering, Casimir leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, as though he expected her to pull away. When she didn't, when instead she rose on her toes and kissed him back, it deepened into something more intense. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and Penelope felt the careful control he always maintained begin to crack. She could feel his restraint in the tension of his muscles, the way he held himself back even as he kissed her like she was air and he was drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Casimir rested his forehead against hers. "This is unwise," he said quietly. "Probably. You're human. Mortal. In 80 years you'll be dust and I'll still be here, unchanged. Then we'd better make the most of whatever time we have." He pulled back to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression was completely open. She saw wonder there, and fear, and something that might have been hope. "I'll speak to the court about your cousin," he said. "I can't promise mercy, but I'll argue for it." "Thank you." He kissed her again, brief and sweet, then stepped away. "Get some rest. We'll talk more when you wake." After he left, Penelope lay in bed and pressed her fingers to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. She should have been thinking about Miranda, about the trial, about the danger that had nearly destroyed them all. Instead, all she could think about was the way Casimir had looked at her, the crack in his armor, the vulnerability he'd shown. She was falling in love with a vampire king. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. The trial took place 3 days later in the Great Hall, with the full court assembled to bear witness. Penelope sat in the gallery reserved for observers, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as Miranda was led in by guards. Her cousin looked small and frightened, her earlier bravado completely gone. Casimir presided from a throne-like chair at the head of the room, flanked by his advisors. He looked every inch the king now, remote and powerful, and when he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. Miranda Hartley, you stand accused of conspiracy, treason, and providing aid to enemies of this court. How do you plead? Miranda's voice shook. Guilty, but I didn't know. I thought. Your ignorance has already been noted, Seraphine interrupted from her position near the throne. It does not absolve you of responsibility. The trial proceeded with clinical efficiency. Witnesses testified to seeing Miranda with Edmund Thorne, to overhearing conversations about the castle's defenses, to finding her letters among his belongings after his death. The evidence was damning and comprehensive, and Miranda seemed to shrink smaller with each new revelation. When it came time for judgment, Casimir stood. The room fell silent. The traditional sentence for treason is death, he said. However, testimony has been brought to my attention regarding your character and the circumstances of your recruitment. After deliberation with my advisors, I offer an alternative. Miranda looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. You will be exiled from this domain and from all vampire territories in the Eastern Dominion. You will be marked as a traitor, and that mark will be visible to any vampire who looks at you. If you are found within our borders after sunset tomorrow, the death sentence will be carried out immediately. Do you accept these terms? Yes, Miranda whispered. Yes, I accept. Then it is done. Guards, remove her. As Miranda was led away, she caught sight of Penelope in the gallery. Their eyes met, and Penelope saw shame and regret, and something that might have been gratitude in her cousin's expression. Then she was gone, and Penelope released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The court dispersed slowly. Penelope made her way down from the gallery and found Casimir waiting for her near the throne. You argued for mercy, she said. I argued for justice. Sometimes they are the same thing. He glanced around the emptying hall. Walk with me. They left the great hall and wandered through the castle's corridors, not speaking for a long time. Finally, they emerged in a garden Penelope hadn't seen before, an impossible space filled with plants that grew without sunlight, phosphorescent flowers providing soft illumination. A fountain bubbled in the center, the water clear as crystal. This is beautiful, Penelope said. It was created by the vampires who built this castle 600 years ago. They wanted to remember what the world above looked like. Casimir sat on the fountain's edge, and Penelope joined him. I've been thinking about what you said, about time. What about it? You were right. We have however long we have, and wasting it because I'm afraid of eventual loss is cowardice. He turned to face her fully. I want you to stay, not as a guest, not as a tool. Stay as yourself, for as long as you'll have me. Penelope's heart hammered. What are you asking? I'm asking if you could love a creature like me, a killer who lives in shadow and feeds on blood, a king who makes hard choices and watches centuries pass. I'm asking if you could be happy here, in this half-life beneath the earth. Are you asking if I could be turned? Casimir's expression tightened. Eventually, perhaps, if you wanted it. But I won't rush you into that choice. Becoming a vampire means giving up the sun, giving up aging, giving up any chance of a normal human life. It's not a decision to make lightly. Penelope thought about her apartment above, her job that had bored her even before the broken engagement, the life she'd built that had felt empty even when it was full. She thought about the past week, the way she'd felt more alive in this underground castle than she had in years. She thought about Casimir, his careful control that masked deep feeling, his protective nature, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered. I don't need normal, she said quietly. Normal was killing me slowly anyway. And yes, I could love you. I think I already do. The words hung in the air between them. Casimir stared at her, and she watched his control fracture completely. He reached for her, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her with an intensity that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, he was shaking. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. I haven't let myself feel this way in centuries. Then we'll figure it out together." They stayed in the garden for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Casimir told her about the castle's history, about the long struggle between vampires and hunters, about the political complexities of ruling a court full of immortal beings with long memories and longer grudges. Penelope told him about her life above the mundane details of human existence, the small joys and petty frustrations, the dreams she'd abandoned when she'd tried to fit herself into someone else's vision of who she should be. As dawn approached in the world above, casting false shadows even in the underground garden's perpetual twilight, Casimir asked the question Penelope had been expecting. "What happens now? You agreed to stay for a week. That week is over." "It is," Penelope agreed. "So I suppose I should make a new agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "The kind where I stay because I want to, not because you asked. The kind where we see if this impossible thing between us can actually work." Casimir smiled, and it transformed his face from marble into something warm and alive. "I accept those terms." The next weeks unfolded like a dream. Penelope officially took up residence in the castle, moving her few belongings from her apartment above. She began to learn the intricacies of vampire court, the ancient hierarchies, the blood bonds that tied families together, the complex etiquette that governed interactions between vampires and humans. Casimir was patient with her questions, and when court business took him away, Seraphine often stepped in as teacher, explaining the history and politics with dry humor. Penelope also discovered that being the Vampire King's acknowledged romantic interest came with its own complications. Some vampires resented her presence, seeing her as a distraction or a weakness. Others tried to befriend her in hopes of gaining favor with Casimir. The human donors and guests treated her with a mixture of awe and envy. She learned to navigate these social currents carefully and found to her surprise that she was better at court politics than she'd expected. Perhaps it was because she'd never wanted power for its own sake, or perhaps because her honesty made people trust her even when they disagreed with her. Through it all, Casimir remained her anchor. He showed her the parts of himself he kept hidden from everyone else, the dry sense of humor that emerged in private, the surprising gentleness with which he handled delicate things, the fierce protectiveness that extended not just to his people, but now to her specifically. She learned to read his silences, to understand the minute shifts in his expression that others missed. And slowly, carefully, he learned to trust her with the vulnerability he'd locked away for centuries. 3 months after the ball, Penelope woke one evening to find Casimir sitting in the chair beside her bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. "Nothing's wrong. I've been thinking." "About what?" "About the future, about what you want from this life." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You've been living in twilight with me, neither fully human nor vampire. That's not sustainable forever." Penelope's pulse quickened. She'd known this conversation was coming eventually, but had been content to let it wait. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you want to remain human, to age and die naturally, I'll accept that. I'll treasure whatever years we have. But if you want to stay with me beyond a human lifetime, if you want to walk through centuries at my side, then I can offer you that too. The choice is yours, Penelope. It always has been." She'd thought about this question in the quiet moments, late at night when Casimir was handling court business, and she lay alone in their shared rooms. She'd imagined growing old while he stayed eternally young, imagined the eventual separation that death would bring. She'd also imagined the alternative becoming something other than human, gaining immortality but losing the sun, the warmth, the simple pleasures of mortal existence. In the end, the choice was simpler than she'd expected. "I want to stay with you," she said. "However long that is, whatever it requires. I want to choose you." Casimir closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they shimmered with emotion. "Are you certain? Once done, it cannot be undone." "I'm certain." "Then we'll need to prepare. The turning process is dangerous for humans. Not all survive it." "How do we improve the odds?" "Time. Exposure to my blood in small amounts over several weeks, letting your body adjust gradually. Strength and health help too." He took her hands in his. "We don't have to do this immediately. We can wait until you're ready." "How long do you recommend?" 6 months of preparation, maybe more. Penelope nodded. Then let's start. The preparation was both easier and harder than she'd expected. Casimir began giving her small amounts of his blood mixed with wine, just enough to begin changing her body's chemistry, making her stronger, sharpening her senses. She felt the changes gradually, the way colors became more vivid, sounds more distinct, the way she could move faster and tire less easily. But there were difficulties too, headaches that lasted for days, sensitivity to light even in the underground, a constant hunger that never quite went away. Through it all, Casimir was patient and attentive, monitoring her progress, adjusting the doses when needed. He never pushed, never rushed. And as the months passed, Penelope felt her love for him deepen into something unshakable, a foundation she could build a life on. The night of the turning came 6 months later. Penelope had asked for it to be private, just her and Casimir, no court witnesses or ceremony. He'd arranged for them to use a chamber deep in the castle's heart, a room warded for safety and silence. Penelope lay on a bed draped in soft fabric, her heart pounding. Casimir sat beside her, his face grave. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "I haven't changed my mind. I want this. I want you." He nodded and leaned down to kiss her, gentle and sweet. Then he pulled back and his expression shifted, became predatory. His fangs extended, sharp and white, and Penelope felt a thrill of fear mixed with anticipation. "It will hurt," he warned, "and you'll feel like you're dying, because you will be. But I'll be here the entire time. I won't leave you. I trust you." He struck quickly, his fangs sinking into her throat. The pain was immense, a burning agony that spread from the bite through her entire body. Penelope gasped and clutched at him, and he held her carefully as he drank. She could feel her life draining away, her heartbeat slowing, her vision dimming. The world began to fade to gray. Then Casimir pulled back and bit his own wrist, pressing it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded. She drank, and his blood was fire and ice simultaneously, burning through her dying body with impossible force. She felt things breaking and reforming inside her, felt her heart stutter and stop, and then restart with a new, slower rhythm. Pain consumed everything, wiped away thought and sensation, and for a time she knew nothing but agony. When awareness returned, the world had changed. Penelope opened eyes that saw with perfect clarity even in the chamber's darkness. She could hear Casimir's heartbeat, slow and steady, could smell the blood in his veins, could feel the power thrumming through her own body like electricity. "Easy," Casimir said, his hand on her shoulder. "Don't move too quickly. You're stronger than you think now." Penelope sat up carefully and looked at her hands. They seemed the same, but paler, the veins visible beneath skin that had taken on the characteristic vampire translucence. She touched her face and felt the sharpness of new fangs. "It worked," she whispered. "It worked." Casimir pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "You survived. You're here." Penelope buried her face against his shoulder and felt tears she hadn't known she could still cry. Relief, joy, and grief for the humanity she'd surrendered, all tangled together. Casimir stroked her hair and let her cry, patient and steady. When she finally pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands. "Welcome to eternity," he said softly. "We have all the time in the world now." The adjustment to vampire life took time. Penelope had to learn to manage the bloodthirst that came with her new nature, to control the enhanced strength that made her clumsy until she adapted. She had to accept that she would never see sunlight again, never feel its warmth on her skin. It was a loss that struck her at unexpected moments, leaving her grieving for simple things she'd taken for granted. But there were compensations. The way she could move now, fast as thought. The heightened senses that made the world richer and stranger. The knowledge that she had centuries ahead of her, time enough to learn and grow and explore. And most of all, the certainty that she would face those centuries with Casimir beside her. Their relationship deepened and evolved. As a vampire, Penelope stood on more equal footing with him, not in terms of power or age, but in terms of existence. She was no longer a fragile human he needed to protect, but an immortal partner who could stand at his side through whatever came. They learned each other's rhythms, discovered how to navigate disagreements between two people who would never run out of time to be stubborn. They found joy in small moments and grand gestures alike. One evening, nearly a year after her turning, Casimir took her to a part of the underground city she'd never seen before, a vast cavern where skilled vampire craftsmen had created something impossible. The ceiling had been covered with thousands of tiny lights, carefully arranged to mimic the night sky above. Stars and constellations glittered overhead, and Penelope stood staring upward in wonder. "I know you miss the surface," Casimir said quietly. "I can't give you the sun, but I can give you the stars." Penelope turned to him with tears in her eyes. "It's beautiful. So are you." He took her hands in his. "I have something to ask you." Penelope's breath caught. "What?" In human terms, it would be called a proposal. In vampire culture, it's a blood bond, a permanent connection that ties two people together for eternity. It's not done lightly, and it's not done often. But I want to bind myself to you, Penelope. I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours, now and forever. Penelope felt joy flood through her, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Casimir pulled her close and kissed her beneath the false stars, and Penelope thought about the journey that had brought her here from heartbroken and hollow to loved and whole. She thought about the girl who'd stood in the shadows wearing mourning black, certain she had nothing left to lose. She thought about the choices she'd made, the risks she'd taken, the life she'd claimed for herself instead of settling for the one others expected. "I love you," she told him, the words easy now. "And I love you," Casimir replied. "My queen in black." The blood bond ceremony took place a month later, witnessed by the full court. It was more elaborate than Penelope had expected, ancient rituals and carefully spoken vows, the exchange of blood sealed with magic that made her skin tingle. When it was finished, she could feel Casimir's presence in the back of her mind, a constant warmth that meant she would never be truly alone again. The years that followed were good ones. Penelope took on responsibilities within the court, using her natural honesty and insight to help mediate disputes, to identify problems before they became crises. She discovered she had a talent for diplomacy, and Casimir relied on her counsel more and more as time passed. Together, they navigated the complexities of vampire politics, faced threats from rival courts and hunter organizations, and slowly worked to bridge the gap between vampire and human societies. They traveled too, when court business allowed visiting other vampire domains, exploring the world's underground cities, and carefully venturing above ground on moonless nights to walk through human cities and remember what they'd left behind. Penelope never stopped missing the sun, but she found new things to love in the darkness. The quiet beauty of nocturnal creatures, the way starlight looked on water, the possibility of forever with the person she loved. One evening, Casimir found her in the garden where he'd first asked her to stay. She was sitting by the fountain, trailing her fingers through the water, and looked up with a smile when he approached. "Thinking about anything in particular?" he asked, settling beside her. "About beginnings," Penelope said. "About that first night, when you walked past Miranda and asked me to dance instead. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd chosen differently?" "No," Casimir said without hesitation, "because I didn't choose randomly. I chose you because you were real, because in a room full of people performing, you were the only one being honest." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "That hasn't changed. You're still the most honest person I know." "I don't know about that. I've gotten much better at court politics." "Politics and honesty aren't mutually exclusive. You've just learned to be strategic about when and how you deploy the truth." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "I'm grateful every day that you said yes, that you stayed, that you chose this life." "I chose you," Penelope corrected. "The life came with you, but you were always the choice." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the fountain's gentle music. Above them, in the world of sunlight, Penelope's former life continued without her. The apartment had been rented to someone else, her job filled, her absence explained away as a relocation abroad. The human world had moved on, as it always did. But down here in the darkness, in this impossible garden beneath the earth, Penelope had found something the surface could never offer. She had found home, she had found love, She had found herself, and she had forever to explore what that meant. Years turned into decades, decades into centuries, and Penelope and Casimir's bond only grew stronger. They faced challenges and celebrated victories, weathered storms and built new traditions. The castle changed around them, adapting to new eras, but the garden remained constant, their private sanctuary, the place where everything had truly begun. Sometimes, late at night when the world above was quietest, Penelope would think about the girl in the black dress who'd gone to a ball expecting nothing. She would think about grief and loss and the strange paths that led to joy. And she would be grateful for every choice that had brought her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love. Casimir would find her in those moments, always somehow knowing when her thoughts had turned contemplative. He would take her hand, or pull her close, or simply sit beside her in companionable silence. They didn't need words anymore, not after so long together. The blood bond carried everything they needed to say. But sometimes, because she was still honest even after all these years, Penelope would tell him anyway. "I love you," she would say. And Casimir, who had learned to speak his heart because of her, would always answer the same way. "And I love you. Forever." It was a promise they had all the time in the world to keep.